Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cauldron. I'm here with Lisa and Claire, and this week we're going to talk about the various things that have been going on in the world of women's rights and the world of child safeguarding. And so on Monday night, the 6th of December, there was a meeting in Alloa, and it was attended by Rona Hotchkiss, who's a former prison governor, Maren Smith, and Eva Comrie. Eva Comrie, of course, is an Alba candidate. Well, she was an Alba candidate in the Holyrood election, and Maren Smith is from ForWomen Scotland. And Lisa attended that meeting, and she's going to tell us a little bit about it.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, I was at the event in Alloa on Monday night. It was great, and thank you to everyone that came and spoke to me, and thank you to all our viewers. It was really nice to put faces to names and to meet with you. I was really interested in what Rona had to say. She was the governor of Cotton Vale in 2014, and she said that she would have described herself as a trans rights activist at one point in her career. She said, you know, she used to house trans prisoners with women prisoners because she was told that's the right thing to do. But now she says, you know, there's no such thing as trans, like you're not born in the wrong body. She describes it as a mental health condition. She was also the governor of Greenock for 9 years. And her concern now is when the self-ID laws go through, you know, that's intact males, that's not actually people getting surgery. This is intact males saying, we are women now, do you like our woman beard? She said intact males can then self-ID and go into women's prison. It doesn't matter what crime they've committed. They could have committed rape, they could have committed murder, they could be paedophiles, and they can just declare themselves to be women, and that is them there. There was a survey done, I can't remember his name, it was Matt, somebody, he did a sort of survey and a report, and his findings were 80% of the female prisoners tolerated male prisoners in their estate. He said it was quite a small survey. The three that made up the 20% that did tolerate them, they said they were almost completely accepting. So even with that sort of demographic, there wasn't even full acceptance in the 20% of people that accepted them, because they said they didn't fully accept them. And yeah, I was just appalled by some of the stuff that she said. You know, there was female prisoners, and they were not able to refer to these other prisoners as men, because by referring to these men as men, this could add extra time onto their sentences, which I just found completely wrong. You know, it's not a crime.
Yeah. Interestingly, regarding the prison situation, keep prisons single sex, they're a UK organisation, and there's a little bit of a theme tonight in some ways of UK organisations helping us in Scotland. So they have produced a report, and one of the things they had was having us send the report to all our MSPs. So I did this for them, and I sent it to all my MSPs. So it was a report with a covering letter from them, and because it comes from a constituents, I think MSPs pay attention to it. And I have 2 replies, both from Conservatives, of course, and one from Maurice Golden, who is a Conservative MSP at this area, and he says that he thanks me for bringing it to his attention, and he says that the safety of females are his utmost priority, and he's engaging with the Scottish Prison Service with respect to the policy of housing trans prisoners. And we have lodged a number of parliamentary questions to ascertain the Scottish Government's position on this matter. So it looks like possibly the Conservatives might be, you know, against housing males with women. And then I also got a reply from Tess White, who said, thank you very much, and I'm looking into it, and I will get back to you after the recess. So it is possible, like with some other things, that the Conservatives, the two replies I've received, might, take up the cause of women in prison. But what really appalls me, so I sent the documents to Labour as well, and Michael Mara and Mercedes Villalba is our two Labour MSPs in the Northeast. I haven't received a reply from them, but I'll give them time to reply. But it really surprises me that Labour can so, these are the most vulnerable women. The women in prison have often come from very, a background of abuse, have come from a background of abuse and abuse by males. And they're probably the most vulnerable women in Scotland, and they're in prison. And you would imagine that the Labour Party, who are meant to stand up for the working class, would, this would be a cause dear to their heart, that the women from more deprived backgrounds are being, in the large part from more deprived backgrounds, are in prisons, and they're getting locked in with sex offenders and rapists, male sex offenders and rapists, and it's putting these women in danger, and it's re-traumatizing them. But the Labour Party, no, they are abandoning women exactly the same way as the SNP and the Greens have abandoned women. So it's I find that very sad, that, the Labour Party attitude to this. So yeah, so that's the males in female prison. And also, the men in prison are going to know that there's this loophole. They're going to know that they can just sort of pinky promise, I'm a woman, and then they're going to get put into a women's prison. And I cannot understand why anybody would imagine that a man is not going to do that. Why wouldn't a male prisoner, say you've been done for rape, sexual assault, murder, and you're in prison for 10 years or 15 years, where are you as a man, a male predator, a male sex offender, where would you like to spend your 15 years? In a male prison or with the females? So they're obviously going to self-ID as females. At the moment, I believe that there's, in the UK, there's over 400 female rapists, which there can't be, because to rape someone, you have to have a penis. But there's 400 of them because they've ID'd as women. And how many of those 400 are in women's prisons? So this is a huge problem with self-ID. And also, it'll be very difficult to find out, because when people get a gender recognition certificate, they legally change their sex on their birth certificate. So how are you going to know that this person is a biological man, other than the fact that he has a penis and is raping women? So the whole thing is just so dangerous. And it's women don't matter. This whole ideology and the way the government's going is so much that women's concerns, we don't matter at all, not at all. And that's a really sad thing about it, that even the Labour Party won't stand up for vulnerable women. And the Labour Party actually is really almost as bad as the rest. I think that we did have really good Labour MSPs, Joanne Lamont, Jenny Mara and Elaine Smith, but unfortunately they stood down at the last election. And I don't hold up much hope for the Labour Party at the moment, but they actually should have a word with themselves, because they're really not being true to what their founders and the cause of socialism and the cause of the working class at all. So Claire, I think you've got some strong opinions again, I'm sure, on our latest bill that's actually going through the UK Parliament, and it has caused such controversy with Joanna Cherry. I think you've been looking into that, the conversion therapy bill. And we heard today although I'm not sure if this is true, but some reports that the consultation period may be extended. because the government aren't too happy with it. So yes, so conversions there are very clear.
Okay, so before I talk about that, I just wanted to say, just listening to Lisa, and I did actually watch the recording that was made of the meeting. One thing that struck me that Rona said is it's not just transgender people that are at risk from men in prison. You know, you've got gay people, you've got sexual offenders, and also minor offenders. You know, they're all still expected to be in prison alongside sometimes really quite violent people. Why the special attention for people who identify as transgender? You know, if they've not had any changes to their body, then they should be in a male prison if the risk is from male people. Putting those men into a female prison is a violation against the rights of the women to a space that is free from men who we already agree they're the problem, they're the risk. So I just wanted to mention that. And also it was quite poignant when she talked about the woman who had had a drug problem and was put in jail for it, had completely rehabilitated herself in prison and was one of the trusted prisoners in there. And they started putting trans identified males in prison. And apparently this one guy had been, well, I think he'd caused some problems and was quite intimidating. And this woman was completely triggered. And she ended up seeking drugs in jail and got herself into all sorts of problems. And Rona mentioned the fact she felt incredibly guilty because she should never have been put in that position where this woman had been traumatized by men her whole life, sexually abused, etc. And this guy had come in and was abusing her and put her right back to square one. It's just unfair. But I wanted to talk about this, and it's the Sex Matters response. You can actually download this from sexmatters.org, and it has pointers and very good points about what you can put in a letter to your MP to ask them to put a pause on the conversion therapy bill that's going through at the moment. Now, there's 3 things that I just wanted to say about it. We have until the 10th to do it. The first thing is that sexual orientation and transsexualism is not equivalent, and that they shouldn't really be lumped in together because they're 2 completely different things. Asking us to think of this bill in terms of both of those groups, it's like fighting yesterday's battles. You know, gay people, we're a secular country now. You know, the religious conversion that used to happen, that's already outlawed. And I don't really ever hear of that happening. And if it did, it's already against the law and they could be prosecuted. So it's disingenuous to add this into the bill. And the third and most important thing is it says, the proposal misses the fastest growing and most brutal form of conversion that is being undertaken today on young people across the mainstream of UK society. It's a form of talk therapy which leads them to believe that they can literally change sex. So the very thing they claim that they're doing this to stop converting people, converting children, is the very thing that will convert children, because we won't be allowed to discuss these issues that children have that make them think they're in the wrong body. You know, no child is in the wrong body, and kids can be dysphoric. We say this time and time again, dysphoric for many reasons, and it's almost always rooted in trauma. And we should stop suggesting to children that they're in the wrong body and perhaps start accepting children for the wonderful people that they are. You know, you see so many stories now of kids completely consumed by this ideology, and it robs them of their life. you know, if they go down the route of taking drugs and having surgeries and things, that is robbing them of normal, healthy relationships in the future, robbing them of sexual function. And, you know, we're talking about young children. I mean, I know we say this every week, but I feel it needs to be said again. It's obscene, you know, and the fastest growing group is young women. And again, we can look back and we can see that women are opting out of growing up to be women. And that, I think, can be directly linked to the sexual abuse that's happening in schools and in society in general. And it's like you say, Denise, you know, women just do not seem to matter. And these girls can see that and they think, well, I don't want to grow up and have to perform sex acts that we see in porn and that boys are expecting. And so they think, well, I'll change sex. But the problems that are associated with the drugs and the surgery, on that basis alone, that shouldn't be allowed. I mean, I really do firmly believe that. For children, it should not be in school. You know, what about just accepting children for who they are? And if, I don't know, if girls want to wear, you know, more masculine clothing, let them. And again, for boys, if they want to present in a more feminine way, what's wrong with just letting people be who they are? Now, that brings me on to my second thing, and that's a book. Now, I actually bought a couple of copies of this one, Sex and Gender, by Phoebe Rose. And now I really recommend this book. I bought a couple of copies and I gave one to school. It was meant to be a gift and it was returned to me with a note saying, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. If we decide to stock it, I've taken a note of the name and the title and the name of the author. And I just think, you know, these schools have such a responsibility. They're quite happy to teach our children that they might be the wrong sex. They're quite happy to teach our children that we should be kind to people who feel like that, but they're not actually willing to teach them facts. This book actually, it's actually a really beautiful book, and it's just such a lovely book, and it basically gives a definition of gender, the fact of being male or female when in reference to social and cultural differences, not biological differences. And this is something that I think children are not being taught. Some children actually think if a boy takes estrogen or a girl takes testosterone, they actually believe that they will literally change sex. That is never, ever going to happen. And we need to stop telling them they can. And these social and cultural ideas that are being put into their head, pushed on to girls and boys, is so restrictive, you know. There was one page, and I'm just going to read this, and this is me finished, but it says, if you stick all of there's so many boxes, isn't there, with gender? I mean, I don't know what the latest count is, 127 or something. Every week there's some, you know, furry gender, pangender, whatever. It says, if you live in a box, can you ever grow? Won't you always be stuck? What would it be like to live outside of these boxes? And what if boxes were for things and not people? Can we live differently and be free? Wouldn't that be liberating? That's where we should be with children. That's a liberating thought. Sticking these children in boxes and setting them down a route of medically transitioning is pain. It's suffering and it's pain, and it's the biggest lie. It's the biggest lie of this generation. And I still struggle even now to think that we're allowing it. And you talk about people not standing up and talking about this. Where are all, you know, we talked earlier on, where are all the feminists? High profile feminists. We talked about Piers Morgan just before we started this call. And I completely agree with them. You know, where are the feminists speaking up about these issues? Women matter. and we need to take charge of our language and of our sex and start saying no.
Yeah, I think the thing with Piers Morgan's comment, because he did it in a tweet, I think a lot of people got like a bit offended by it, because a lot of women have been standing up to their detriment. But in actual fact, the agencies are UN Women are the worst agency ever. They're actually the worst, most misogynistic, patriarchal agency. Now, they're staffed by women, but they actually put out a little video, I think it was today, where they said that the most discriminated against, the women, the people that had the women that were the worst off in the world, are trans women. How can that possibly be true? When you look at how women are treated around the world, how you look at women in India or women in Saudi Arabia or women in Africa, and their lives being blighted.
Or women in America. I mean, it's not just third world countries. It's the world over, you know. FGM is not happening to men, you know. Forced marriage is not happening to men. It's happening to women, and we need to start. Women need to start stepping up. High-profile women need to start stepping up. More need to start stepping up. And
the problem is that they're in the agencies and they're getting paid. Now, one time, I think it was Chomsky said to Andrew Marr. So Andrew Marr says, I don't think that, you know, I say what I think. And Chomsky said to him, yeah, of course you do. But if you didn't think that, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. And that's what's happened to these agencies. The women that have got to the top because they thought the orthodoxy, what they were meant to think, and that's how they got there. So these women, these agencies are captured, and these women are never standing up for women. And that's why we get
some of them are, you know, some of them are. J.K. Rowling is.
No, sorry. Agencies. Yes. The women in charge of the agencies are never standing up. There's no women in charge of UN Women or in gender or any of those places that are ever going to stand up for women. Nicola Sturgeon is never standing up for women. Lorna Slater is never standing up for women. None of them ever will. Nicola Sturgeon, feminist to her fingertips, is never going to do it. These professional feminists the world over are already bought by the gender ideology, and they think that way because that's what keeps them in a job, and that's why they're in the job, because they think that way. So there's no way these agencies are going to do it. And so what's happened is the women's sector, the women's third sector agencies, the head of rape crisis in Edinburgh is a male. And do you think that the heads of Rape Crisis Scotland, this woman, Sandy Brindley, she's never going to stand up for women, ever. And that's the head of Rape Crisis Scotland. They sold rape survivors down the river during the Six Words campaign, down the river. These women are never, ever standing up for women. And they are middle class women. They're never standing up for working class women, the women that are suffering, the women in the jails. They're never standing up for them. So what's happening is we've got a situation where grassroots women's groups have to take on the government on behalf of women, because the agencies, the third sector agencies that are meant to advocate for women, are selling women out. And that's the situation we're in. And that's why we've got ForWomen Scotland taking the Scottish Government to court for their gender representation on public boards. We now have, again, like Keep Prisoners Single Sex, we have Fair Play for Women who've come in and they're taking the Scottish Government to court over the census. Because what's happened is they had to take the Westminster Government to court, and the Westminster Government lost. But the Scottish Government are doing exactly the same as the Westminster Government. So now they're getting taken to court by Fair Play for Women. we have to pay into crowdfunders. We've had to pay. ForWomen Scotland have had to raise about 150,000. Imagine 150,000 they could have went to women's aid organisations instead of taking our own government to court. We pay as taxpayers. We pay Nicola Sturgeon and not just the Scottish government the legal fees of the Scottish government, but also the third sector organisations that then come in and intervene on behalf with the Scottish government. And the trouble with these they're funded by the Scottish government, so they're funded by us. So we are paying 3 times to fight a court case to maintain our rights, which should be maintained for us by our government, but our government has sold us out. So sadly, that's the situation we're in. And we're not going to change that until we get a change of government, to be frank, because that's the situation we're in. We need to have a change of government. So that's my rant over for today. But yeah, I'm with Piers Morgan on this. And as you could guess. So we go on to the next thing, which is a hot topic this week, has been the sex survey for school children. And of course, I would say Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh wrote in the National today a very good article, which really basically said a lot of what I think the outrage that people feel about it. And I think her point is these children who are getting this survey have already been through quite a traumatic time with, disruption to their exams, all the restrictions of COVID, and the disruption to their education and their friendships and not seeing their friends. And now, instead of, and also the poverty, there's a lot of children because of COVID and because of Brexit, there's a lot more, the attainment gap is widening, and and more children are living in poverty. So the children aren't getting asked any of this stuff, they're not getting asked, did you have a breakfast before you came to school this morning, or things like that. They're getting asked about their sex lives, not just about their sex lives. They're also getting asked about, alcohol, drugs, all this stuff. Now, the data is the child is identifiable. This data is there forever with that child. So the child fills in this survey, whether they're telling the truth or not, we can't tell. But because it's a survey, it's the child can maybe tell the truth or may not. There's no qualified person there. The child fills in the survey, and it's there forever that this is what the child was like at 14, for example. But what's happened now, which I'll go with Lisa, the very important thing about the survey, so it's asking about their sex lives with no consideration for, firstly, the child might not know what anal sex is. So get asked. I didn't know at 14. And also the child may be triggered because they may have had some abuse, and this may trigger them, and there's nothing, how could you answer a question if you've been abused by a family member and you get asked what kind of sex you've had? How, as a child, can you answer that? It's not consensual. What do you write? You've got a survey in front of you. So really, it's the most inconsiderate, dangerous, just have no consideration whatsoever for what these children have gone through and the effect that this kind of survey could have on the rest of their life, because this data is shared across multiple agencies and government departments and third parties. So they just complete disregard for the rights of the child. And to think this is a government that was trying to virtue signal its way by incorporating the UN rights of the child, and then had to go to court because they wasn't allowed to do it, so they lost the court case. So you think, well, they ought to care about the rights of the child. Well, they don't. They definitely do not care at all about your child. not at all. And why they want to ask them sexually intrusive questions that you wouldn't ask an adult, they wouldn't answer themselves. You go and ask every MSP when was the last time they had anal sex. Let's see how they answer. I really hate even saying this. I can't believe that we are asking our children about whether they have oral sex, how many, what contraceptives they use, etc., in this survey at such a young age. It's just sexualizing them, and they have enough to cope with. I actually was complaining about this, and we get called Mary of White House and things like that. And this person replied to me and said, think of it nowadays. You went to school. It's a bit ageist. You went to school 40 years ago. I was like, oh, that's a bit ageist. And nowadays they've got like loads of pornography. It's full of pornography. And I'm like, yes, so that makes it right. So because outside school, on the internet, there's a lot of pornography, so we should bring pornography into school. Is that the answer?
That's actually what I was just going to say, because when you think about what the children are being taught as sex education, and that, we saw from the video a few weeks ago where the parents were objecting, and John Swinney was there talking about, trying to defend the fact that they're teaching kids about porn as being a sort of a nice thing to watch, to get turned on, and that you're getting turned on and masturbating, etc., is normal through the use of porn, and then anal sex as a contraceptive, etc. To be honest, this census just feels like a marker for the government to see how well they're doing with getting this stuff through to children in school, and by asking these questions, by talking so openly about anal sex, about porn, that's normalizing it for children. So they'll then maybe be thinking, oh, well, maybe I should do that, or that is normalizing something that shouldn't be. I mean, I would say probably most adults have tried anal sex, but it's not something that I would say that is normal sex for most people, and certainly for children, I would imagine that would terrify them at 14, for goodness sake.
Well, for women, obviously, because for women yeah. It's not pleasurable, because we don't have prostates. And so my friend Gavin, who a gay man, has assured me that it's not pleasurable for women. And also for girls, there's a lot of risks and dangers with it. So
health risks.
Yeah, health risks.
While we know these things exist, promoting it is a completely different ball game. And we shouldn't. And to be honest, this census, it feels like the named person by stealth. They're finding out all this information, and I believe they said nothing would happen with it unless there was something out of the ordinary. Now, what would that be? And then what's going to happen at that point? These are not questions that should be in school, and frankly, that level of discussion, that's down to parents really to talk to children, or if children are worried, obviously then if they feel they can confide in a teacher, well, fair enough, but this is wrong what they're doing. And it's good to see this, it's actually very good to see local authorities saying no and withdrawing it.
So Lisa, you were looking into this as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I totally agree with you, Claire. It's like a back door for the named person. It's a back doorway in. I actually think it's a direct breach of the Article 8 right to a private family life. I have been told some of what possibly is on the primary school questions. They are obviously not sexual, but they are just invasive into the family home.
Yeah, and we don't need to know this stuff.
No, we don't. And also, we're, like you say, we're normalizing this for 14-year-olds, and you're putting a pressure on them, like to say that maybe they should be having sex. Like a lot of 14-year-olds, the age of sex, like the age of the average person having sex has gone up in recent years. whereas it used to be quite low. So, you know, we've raised the age of drinking, we've raised the age of smoking, but the age of sex hasn't gone anywhere. It's just kind of stayed here, which isn't really right when you look at the bigger picture. And I did notice as well, when I was looking through the questions, there's no questions on if any of the sex was consensual. It's just, have you had this sex? How many people have you had it with? Did you use contraception? But nothing about consent. So
and they're all underage. You know, this is all underage children. It's not appropriate.
Consent isn't real anyway. What I do want to point out is this is an opt-out basis only. So if you've got children in Angus, Dundee City and Perth and Kinross, you need to opt out. This is an opt-out only. You don't opt into it. Get on the phone, get on the email to your schools and let them know that little Jimmy is not taking part in this census. Let them know it's absolutely absurd. You probably wouldn't answer questions about yourself. I know I wouldn't. If somebody said to me, have you had anal sex? How many people have you had anal sex with? Did you use contraception? I'd be like, mind your own blinding business. One other point, when you were talking about born in the wrong body, I was having this discussion today actually, and I just don't understand this phrase, born in the wrong body, because where's the other body? Like, how could you be, right, you're born into your body, you come out your mother, out of your mother's vagina, and that's like your body. You're not like a little soul floating about looking for your body. And it's quite ableist as well, because what about disabled people? Are they born in the wrong body?
Yeah. And why do they come to believe they're in the wrong body? Could it be that when they're a little boy wanting to wear something sparkly, that adults around them are imposing their view and their stereotypical views on the child? You know, if they want to wear a sparkly dress, how about just saying, okay, you know, not, oh, you want to wear a sparkly dress, you might be a girl. Let's give you drugs. Let's amputate your penis and invert it and create a cavity that will never heal and has to be dilated every single day for the rest of your life. It's really obscene.
Actually, I've just got one more point to make as well, just before I forget. I was in a sort of call the other night, and one of the important points that were stressed was make sure your children know, as much as you've opted out of this, make sure your children know that they don't have to answer these questions. They don't have to, like, you know, succumb to the pressure of the teacher. Make them have that confidence to say, no, I don't want to answer that. I don't want to answer these questions, and reassure them. Like I have, you know, I've reassured my children, if you feel uncomfortable at school, if your teacher asks you something inappropriate, leave. I will deal with the consequences. You do not have to. I am the parent. If you feel uncomfortable, leave.
And I agree with all that in what you've said about opting out. But the other thing I think is really important is actually, I think they're breaching multiple data protection laws here, but we'll leave that to the experts who hopefully are on the case. I'm sure they are. The point is, we've seen councils reject this or pause this or say they're not doing it. So it has two consequences. So the Scottish government are saying, oh, this is statistical purposes, but now it's not statistical anymore because you've got too many opt-outs. You've got councils opting out completely, so that means you won't have geographical coverage. And also you've got pupils opting out. So the type of pupil with strong mothers like Lisa will not be taking the survey. There might be a slightly different type than the pupils that are taking the survey, if you see what I mean. So it's not going to be any use for statistical purposes because you don't have the coverage. So I would say there's that issue. But the most important issue to take from this is all the councils have said they're not, because the councillors have got scared. So Fife Council, for example, it was a Conservative motion, but it was unanimous. So I think Fife will be a lot of Labour and SNP, and probably Lib Dem as well, actually. So they all voted to pause the survey and not send it out. So what we have to do is, like I say every show, we need to stand for council and we need to get councillors elected, because once councillors are elected in May, it can be stopped in the council chamber. all their madness can be stopped. The councils just won't implement it. And one thing to remember when we're saying we're not implementing it, if the Scottish Government passes self-ID, which they can do because Sturgeon has Harvey and they have a majority, so they can pass it. But because the Equality Act is reserved, they can't do anything about the single-sex exemptions in the Equalities Act. So if we can have councillors in the councils, they can invoke these single-sex exemptions. So then they can ensure women-only services, like women's aid and so on. They can ensure single-sex changing rooms, single-sex toilets, none of these ridiculous sex surveys at school. So single-sex sports. So what we really have to do is win council elections in May. We don't have to win councils, we just have to have enough gender critical women that want to protect women's rights and safeguard children in there. Because of the method of electing councils mean most councils are hung, they're not like one party dominating. So if we have a few in every council, we'd be able to negotiate to ensure that women and children are protected. So that's what we have to do. We really have to do this. It's our only hope.
I was just going to say also, think about why these councils are saying no, and that is parental power, because parents have said enough is enough, we're not accepting this. So we have a lot of power as parents, and it's time we started asserting that.
I've got two last points to make as well. One is the Scottish building regulations have got single-sex spaces for children over the age of 8. And two, it was mentioned in Alloa that only after a complaint has been made to the school will the rights of the children be taken into consideration. So if you are unhappy about something, complain, because until that complaint is made, nothing will be done.
Right, so well, that's the Cauldron for this week, and thank you for joining us. So the takeaway from this is any parents with children at school, write to the school and make sure that you opt out from this census. You can also put pressure on your councillors to opt out the entire area from the census by writing to them or contacting your councillor and telling them that your opinion of it. So there's those two things to do. And then, of course, stand for council. Get yourself a party that has gender critical views and stand for council, or even stand as an independent in some area.
And write to your MP about the banning the conversion therapy.
Okay, so bye for now then. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.